Captain Eva Rostova felt the familiar grit of desert dust between her teeth as she walked across the sun-bleached tarmac of Forward Operating Base Kestrel. The air shimmered with heat, distorting the shapes of the low, sand-colored buildings, and the formidable aircraft parked in neat rows. Her own plane, an A-10 Thunderbolt II, sat waiting. To most, it was an ugly, brutish-looking thing. It wasn't sleek or fast like a fighter jet. It was built around a massive 7-barrel cannon, a flying tank designed for one purpose, to protect the men on the ground. To Eva, it was the most beautiful sight in the world. She called it the Warthog, a name it had earned for its stubborn toughness, a quality she knew a little something about. She was headed for the pre-mission briefing, her flight suit zipped up, helmet tucked under her arm. As she entered the cramped, air-conditioned tent, the conversation died down. A dozen men from SEAL Team 3, call sign Reaper, turned to look at her. They were legends, the elite of the elite, and their confidence filled the room like a physical presence. Their leader, Lieutenant Commander Mason Bull Thorne, a mountain of a man with a jaw that looked like it was carved from granite, gave her a slow, dismissive once-over. "Well, look what we have here," Bull said, his voice a low rumble. "Our air support has arrived. Captain Rostova, is it? You look like you just got out of flight school." A few of his men snickered. Eva's jaw tightened, but her expression remained neutral. She was used to this. At 5'6", with sharp, intelligent features and a focused gaze, she didn't fit their idea of a combat pilot. They saw a woman young and untested in their eyes, not the officer who had graduated top of her class and had more hours in the A-10 than anyone else in the squadron. "I'm fully qualified, Commander," she replied, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the low murmurs. "Call sign Valkyrie. I'll be your eye in the sky today." Bull grunted, a sound of clear disbelief. He turned to the intelligence officer. "All right, let's get this over with. We're going into the Zarin Valley. Intel says a high-value target is meeting with local insurgents. It's supposed to be a simple snatch and grab. We go in, bag him, and get out before sunrise." He then glanced back at Eva. "Your job, Valkyrie, is to circle overhead and stay out of the way unless we call. And I mean, unless we call. We don't need any hotshot pilots getting trigger-happy and drawing attention to us. You read me?" The insult was clear. He was treating her like a taxi driver, a glorified observer. Every pilot in her position was a trained killer, a master of air-to-ground combat. The A-10 wasn't meant to just circle overhead. It was meant to bring hellfire down on the enemy, but Eva knew arguing would be pointless. It would only reinforce their perception of her as emotional or difficult. The only way to earn their respect was to do her job flawlessly. "I read you, Commander," she said, her tone clipped and professional. "Stay out of the way, loud and clear." She took a seat in the corner, listening intently as the rest of the briefing unfolded. The plan seemed straightforward, almost too straightforward. The Zarin Valley was a notorious hornet's nest, a maze of rocky canyons and hidden caves that had swallowed up patrols before. The intelligence suggested a light enemy presence, but something about it felt wrong to Eva. She had studied the reconnaissance photos for hours, noting the strange lack of activity in the villages, the way the shadows seemed to fall in unnatural patterns. It was a hunter's instinct, a feeling in her gut that told her a predator was hiding in plain sight. After the briefing, as the SEALs geared up, loading their rifles and checking their night vision goggles, one of the younger ones, a man with the call sign Rook, approached her. He was quieter than the others, his eyes holding a measure of curiosity rather than contempt. "Don't mind Bull," he said, his voice low. "He's just old school. Thinks women should be at home, not in the cockpit." "I'm not here to make friends, Rook," Eva replied, her eyes fixed on the mission map on her tablet. "I'm here to do my job, and so is he. As long as he does his and I do mine, we'll be fine." Rook nodded, seeming to respect her directness. "Fair enough," Just be ready. That valley has a bad reputation. Intel says it's clear, but we've heard that before. I'm always ready, she said, and she meant it. An hour later, she was in the cockpit of her Warthog, going through the pre-flight checklist. The roar of the twin engines was a comforting symphony to her ears. Down below, the SEALs boarded, their helicopters, their dark shapes disappearing into the belly of the machines. Ava watched them go, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. The commander's arrogance was a liability. Overconfidence got people killed, and Bull had it in spades. He believed his team was invincible, that they could handle anything. Ava hoped he was right. She taxied onto the runway, the ground crew giving her a final thumbs up. Pushing the throttles forward, she felt the immense power of the A-10 surge, pressing her back into her seat. The plane lifted off the ground, climbing steeply into the dark, star-filled sky. Below her, the desert stretched out like a vast, empty ocean. She banked the plane, turning towards the Zarin Valley. Her call sign, Valkyrie, was a name from old myths, a female figure who decided who lived and who died in battle. Tonight, she had a feeling that name would be put to the test. As she flew, she kept her senses sharp, her eyes scanning the instruments and the infrared display that showed the world below in ghostly shades of black and white. She was a silent guardian, an unseen protector. The men on the ground might not believe in her, but that didn't matter. She believed in her plane, and she believed in herself. And as she circled high above the sleeping mountains, she prepared for the worst, praying that the quiet on her radio would last, but knowing deep down that it wouldn't. The valley was waiting, and it was hung. The flight to the Zarin Valley was tense and silent. Eva kept her Warthog in a wide, lazy orbit, thousands of feet above the rugged terrain. From her vantage point, the valley was a black scar carved into the earth, a place where moonlight feared to tread. On her forward-looking infrared, or FLIR display, the ground was a mosaic of cool blues and purples, with the occasional warm signature of a nocturnal animal. She watched as the two Black Hawk helicopters carrying Reaper Team flew, low and fast, hugging the contours of the landscape to avoid detection. They were ghosts, moving silently toward their objective. The insertion was flawless. The helicopters touched down in a cloud of dust, and the SEALs disembarked, melting into the shadows with practiced efficiency. Eva tracked their heat signatures. As they moved in a tight, disciplined formation toward the target compound, a small collection of mud-brick buildings nestled at the base of a cliff. The radio remained silent, just the faint rhythmic hiss of static. According to the plan, this was the easy part. Bull's voice was supposed to come over the radio in an hour, calm and collected, confirming they had the target and were ready for extraction. But the hour came and went. A cold dread began to creep up Ava's spine. She tightened her orbit, her eyes glued to the FLIR screen. The SEALs' heat signatures were clustered inside the main building. They weren't moving. It could mean they were lying in wait, exercising patience. Or it could mean something had gone terribly wrong. "Reaper 1, this is Valkyrie," she said, breaking radio silence. Her voice was calm, betraying none of the anxiety churning inside her. "Status update. Over. Static. Nothing. Reaper 1, Valkyrie. Do you copy? Still nothing." This was bad. Protocol dictated she maintain her position and wait for contact, but her instincts screamed that waiting was a death sentence for the men below. She zoomed her camera in, focusing on the compound. The buildings were still dark, inert, but then she saw it. A flicker of movement on the ridge overlooking the compound. Then another, and another. Her blood ran cold. The screen lit up with dozens, then hundreds of heat signatures. They were swarming from hidden caves and tunnels, surrounding the compound in a perfectly coordinated maneuver. It was a trap. A massive, well-planned ambush. The intelligence hadn't just been wrong, it had been a deliberate lie. Suddenly, the night erupted. Muzzle flashes strobed from the ridges as heavy machine guns and RPGs opened up on the compound. The mud brick walls exploded inward, showering the seals with debris. The radio crackled to life, but it wasn't Bull's confident voice. It was a desperate, panicked shout from Rook. "Contact! Contact! We're surrounded! Pinned down in the main building! 2 men down! We need immediate support! Valkyrie, do you read me?" "I read you, Rook," Eva snapped back, her hands flying across the controls. She pushed the Warthog's nose down, diving toward the valley. "I'm on my way. Mark your position with IR strobes." Bull is hit. He's hit bad. Oh God, they're everywhere. The sound of automatic rifle fire crackled over the radio, so close it felt like it was inside her cockpit. "Hold on, Reaper, I'm coming!" She had to get clearance to engage. Protocol was absolute, firing without authorization from the ground. Commander or a forward air controller could get her court-martialed. "Reaper 1, this is Valkyrie. I need you to confirm engagement. Commander Thorne, do you authorize fire support?" The only reply was a scream of pain, then more gunfire. Bull was either unconscious or dead. She couldn't wait. The men below were being slaughtered. Making a split-second decision, Eva flicked the master arm switch to the on position. A calm female voice in her headset announced, "Master arm on." The systems were ready. The cannon was ready. Her own commander's voice crackled. In her ear from the operations center back at the base. "Valkyrie, what's your status? We're hearing chaos on Reaper's channel." "Sir, Reaper team is in a kill box," she reported, her voice tight with urgency as she weaved the A-10 through the narrow canyon walls. Tracers, like angry red hornets, zipped past her canopy. "They're surrounded and taking heavy casualties. The ground commander is down. I am engaging the enemy to protect friendly forces." "You do not have authorization, Captain?" The commander's voice boomed. "You stand down until you get confirmation from the ground." Eva ignored him. She could see the SEAL's infrared strobes now, blinking frantically from the shattered remains of the building. And she could see the enemy fighters closing in, preparing for the final assault. There was no time. "I have positive identification of friendly forces and positive identification of hostile targets," she said, her voice like ice. "I am weapons hot. Out." She switched her radio frequency back to the SEAL's channel. "Reaper team, this is Valkyrie. Danger close. I'm starting my run from the north. Keep your heads down." A wave of relief washed over Rook's voice. "God bless you, Valkyrie. Light 'em up." Eva lined up her first target. A heavy machine gun nest on the eastern ridge that was pouring relentless fire into the compound. The heads-up display projected a targeting reticle onto the canopy glass in front of her. She centered it on the enemy position, her thumb hovering over the red button on her control stick. The plane shuddered slightly as it screamed through the air, the ground rushing up to meet her. She was flying into a wall of fire. The enemy knew she was coming and had turned their guns on her, but the A-10 was built for this. Its titanium cockpit, the bathtub, could withstand direct hits from anti-aircraft cannons. Eva trusted it with her life. Her focus narrowed until the world consisted of only 3 things: the target, the reticle, and the button under her thumb. The enemy fighters were just faceless heat signatures on a screen. The men in the compound were her brothers in arms, and she would not let them die. Not tonight. With a steady hand, she squeezed the trigger. The sound was not just a sound. It was a physical force that shook the very air inside the cockpit. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the heart and soul of the Warthog, erupted with a deafening roar that Eva felt deep in her bones. It was a sound the enemy had come to call the Devil's Cross, a terrifying, deep-throated brrrr-tee that signaled imminent and total destruction. A torrent of 30mm armor-piercing incendiary rounds, each the size of a milk bottle, spewed from the nose of the plane at a rate of 70 rounds per second. From the ground, it looked as if a bolt of lightning had shot down from the heavens. The stream of tracers lit up the night sky, a solid line of white-hot fire connecting the Warthog directly to the machine gun nest on the ridge. The impact was absolute. The rocks, the gun, and the men operating it vanished in a brilliant, violent Flash of light and a cloud of pulverized dust. 1 second they were there, a deadly threat to the men below, and the next they were simply gone. Inside the compound, the surviving SEALs, huddled behind the crumbling remains of a wall, flinched as the sky tore open. They had been preparing for the end, checking their last magazines, whispering messages for their families into their radios. They had dug in for a last stand. Then came the roar. Rook peered over the wall and his jaw dropped. The A-10, black. Against the dark sky was a terrifying angel of vengeance. It banked hard, its engines screaming, seemingly ignoring the storm of enemy fire directed at it. He saw tracers bounce harmlessly off its fuselage as it climbed, ready for another pass. "Holy!" One of the other SEALs breathed, his eyes wide with awe. "Did you see that?" Bull, propped against a wall and clutching a bloody wound in his side, grunted, his face pale, but his eyes now burning with a new, desperate hope. He had mocked the pilot, dismissed her. Now, she was the only thing keeping them alive. "Valkyrie, good hit! Good hit!" Rook yelled into his radio. "There, on the western ridge now, RPGs. Copy that, Reaper. Rolling in." Eva's voice replied, impossibly calm amidst the chaos. She pulled the Warthog into a steep, gut-wrenching climb, then rolled it over, diving back toward the valley from the opposite direction. Her instruments screamed warnings. At her, missile lock, radar detection, low altitude. She ignored them all, her focus absolute. She saw the telltale flash of an RPG launch, a fiery streak heading straight for the compound. There was no time to line up a cannon run. "Fox 2, she said, her voice level as she squeezed another trigger. A Maverick missile dropped from its pylon under her wing, its rocket motor igniting with a whoosh. It streaked through the night, guided by the laser designator she was pointing with her targeting pod. The missile flew with unerring accuracy, striking the group of RPG gunners just as they were reloading. The resulting explosion was massive, a secondary blast indicating their ammunition supply had gone up with them. For the next 20 minutes, Ava became a whirlwind of destruction. She was a master of her craft, a warrior in her element. She flew the A-10 not like a machine, but like an extension of her own body. She weaved through canyons so narrow her wingtips almost scraped the rock walls, using the terrain to shield herself from enemy fire. She unleashed the Warthog's full arsenal with surgical precision. Her cannon chewed through enemy positions, her missiles obliterated fortified bunkers, and her rockets scattered advancing infantry. She was in constant communication with Rook, who was now her eyes on the ground. "Valkyrie, they're massing for an assault on the south entrance." Bertie. The southern approach was turned into a cratered wasteland. They have a technical, a truck with a heavy gun, coming up the east road. A missile turned the truck into a twisted, burning wreck. Down in the compound, the SEALs could only watch in stunned silence. The sheer, unadulterated violence being unleashed on their behalf was breathtaking. This wasn't just air support, it was a reckoning. The pilot wasn't just circling overhead. She was fighting with a ferocity and skill they had never witnessed. She was a Valkyrie, a chooser of the slain, and tonight she had chosen their enemies. The volume of enemy fire began to slacken. The relentless, overwhelming assault had been broken. The attackers, who had been so sure of their victory, were now in disarray, being hunted and destroyed from the air. Their trap had been turned against them. The hunter had become the prey. Eva made one final low pass over the valley, her cannon, spitting its last few hundred rounds to suppress any remaining pockets of resistance. Her fuel gauge was blinking red, and her ammunition counters were almost at zero. "Reaper team, this is Valkyrie," she said, her voice finally showing a hint of strain. "The area appears to be clear. I'm bingo fuel. I have to return to base. Extraction should be on its way." Rook's voice came back, thick with emotion. "Valkyrie, we owe you. We all owe you. You saved us. From beside him, another voice, weak but firm, crackled over the radio. It was Bull. Valkyrie. Thorn here. Get home safe, Captain. That was the finest damn flying I've ever seen. Hearing those words from him, after the disrespect and mockery, was a victory in itself. But Ava felt no sense of triumph, only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. "See you on the ground, Reaper," she said softly. She banked the Warthog one last time, climbing out of the valley of death she had just sanitized. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, painting the horizon in shades of gray and orange. A new day was dawning. For the men of Reaper Team, it was a day they had not expected to see. And they owed it all to the woman they had underestimated, the pilot in the ugly plane who had single-handedly lit up the sky and held back the darkness. The flight back to Fob Kestrel was a blur of adrenaline slowly giving way to exhaustion. Ava flew on autopilot for much of the way, her mind replaying the frantic dance of life and death over the Zarin Valley. Every explosion, every tracer, every desperate call over the radio was seared into her memory. Landing the Warthog felt strange. The aircraft, now light on fuel and empty of ammunition, seemed to float onto the runway. As she taxied toward her parking spot, she could see the activity on the base was at a fever pitch. The two Quick Reaction Force helicopters were already spooling up, ready to go and retrieve what was left of Reaper Team. When she finally cut the engines, the sudden silence was deafening. She sat in the cockpit for a long moment, the quiet hum of the avionics the only sound. Her hands were still trembling slightly. She took a deep breath, then another, forcing the calm back into her body. She had done it. She had held the line. The ground crew chief unlatched her canopy, his face a mixture of awe and concern. "Captain, you all right? We heard the radio chatter. Sounded like all hell broke loose down there." "We're all right, Chief," Eva said, her voice raspy. "Just get her rearmed and refueled. She did good work tonight." As she climbed down from the cockpit, her squadron commander was waiting for her on the tarmac. His face was grim. He had ordered her to stand down, and she had directly disobeyed him. She braced herself for the inevitable dressing down, the formal reprimand that was surely coming. "Captain Rostova," he began, his tone stern. "In my office. Now." She followed him, her back straight, her expression unreadable. But as they walked past the main briefing tent, the flap was thrown open and a medic rushed out, followed by two others carrying a stretcher. On it was Commander Thorn. He was pale and covered in blood-soaked bandages, but he was conscious. As they passed, his eyes found Ava's. He lifted a hand, just a small gesture, and gave her a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of profound respect, a silent acknowledgement that went far beyond words. In that moment, Eva knew that no matter what her commander said to her, she had made the right choice. The debriefing was tense. Eva gave her report in a clear, concise monotone, detailing the ambush, the loss of communication with the ground, commander, and her decision to engage. She left out no details, including her direct violation of a superior's order. "You understand the gravity of what you did, Captain?" her commander said when she had finished. "You went against protocol. You could have caused a friendly fire incident of catastrophic proportions." "Sir, with respect," Eva replied, her gaze unwavering, "if I had followed protocol, we would be planning a recovery mission for the bodies of Reaper Team right now, not treating their wounded. I assessed the situation and made a command. Decision to preserve the lives of our soldiers. I stand by that decision." Before her commander could respond, the door to the office opened. A grim-faced intelligence officer stepped in, holding a tablet. "Sir, you need to see this. We've just received the initial after-action report from Reaper's helmet cams, and we've been analyzing the enemy communications we intercepted. During the firefight," he placed the tablet on the desk, "the ambush wasn't just a case of bad intel. It was a setup. The enemy knew exactly where and when Reaper Team would be. They were drawn into that compound deliberately. The number of fighters was 10 times what was reported. Someone wanted that team wiped off the map. A heavy silence fell over the room. The implications were chilling. This wasn't just a mission gone wrong, it was a betrayal. And there's more, the intel officer continued, swiping to another screen. The enemy chatter, they mention a source. They were fed the intel, sir. From our side. Eva felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This was bigger than a simple ambush. It was a conspiracy. Her defiance had not only saved the SEALs, but it had also inadvertently exposed something rotten within their own ranks. Later that day, after being dismissed with a curt, "We'll look into it," Eva was in the mess hall trying to force down some food she had no appetite for. She felt isolated, the hero of the hour who was also in serious trouble. The other pilots kept their distance, unsure of what to say or do. Then, the doors opened, and Rook walked in, his arm in a sling, his face bruised but his eyes clear. Behind him were the other 5 walking wounded from Reaper Team. They moved as one, their steps silent and purposeful. They walked directly to her table and stood there looking down at her. The entire mess hall went silent. Rook spoke first, his voice quiet but carrying through the room. We wanted to thank you, Captain." Another SEAL, a man who had sneered at her during the briefing, cleared his throat. "What you did up there, we've never seen anything like it. You saved our lives, all of us." Eva looked at their faces, at the raw, honest gratitude in their eyes. These were men who lived and died by a code of strength and mutual respect, and they were offering her the highest honor they could give. "Just doing my job," she said. "Softly, no," a voice rumbled from the doorway. All heads turned. Lieutenant Commander Bull. Thorne stood there, leaning heavily on a crutch, his torso wrapped in thick bandages. He hobbled over to the table, his eyes locked on Eva. The arrogant, dismissive man from the briefing tent was gone. In his place was a humbled leader who had stared death in the face. He stood before her, the commander of the most elite fighting force in the world, and he looked her straight in the eye. "That wasn't just a job, Captain. You disobeyed a direct order. You risked your career. You flew into a meat grinder for men who didn't even show you the courtesy of respect. What you did was an act of honor." He slowly, painfully extended his hand. "My name is Mason Thorne, and it is a privilege to know you." Eva stood up and took his hand. His grip was firm, his palm rough. In that handshake, a powerful, unspoken bond was forged. A bond of warriors, survivors, who had been through the fire together and come out the other side. The mockery and injustice she had faced had been washed away by the fire of her Warthog's cannons and replaced by the unshakable respect of the very men who had once doubted her. And in that moment, Eva knew she was no longer alone. She had allies, and they were going to find out who had sent them into that valley to die. The investigation moved with a speed that was almost unheard of in the military. The attempted annihilation of a SEAL team, combined with the evidence of an internal leak, sent shockwaves all the way up to the highest levels of command. A team of investigators from Central Command descended on FRB Kestrel, turning the base upside down. Eva and the surviving members of Reaper Team were interviewed for hours on end, each recounting their version of the events in painstaking detail. During his interview, Commander Thorne was relentless. He was no longer just a team leader. He was a man on a mission for justice. He described the initial briefing, the condescending attitude he and his men had shown toward Captain Rostova, and, most importantly, the officer who had delivered the faulty intelligence with such unwavering certainty. Colonel Jennings. Jennings was a career officer, a man known for his ambition and his disdain for anyone who didn't fit his rigid, old-school mold. He had been a vocal opponent of women serving in combat roles, and he had clashed with Eva's squadron commander in the past, arguing that pilots like her were a liability. He had personally signed off on the intelligence package for the Zarin Valley mission, assuring everyone that it was a walk in the park. The pieces began to fall into place. The investigators dug into Jennings's record, his communications, his financial history. What they found was damning. Jennings had been passed over for a promotion, a star that he believed was rightfully his. The general who got the position instead was a strong advocate for the integration of women into combat units and had publicly praised Eva's squadron. Jennings's bitterness had curdled into something far more sinister. The investigators discovered encrypted messages between Jennings and a contact known to be an intermediary for enemy forces. He hadn't sold them information for money. He had done it for something he considered far more valuable: revenge. His plan was simple and cruel. He would send the most elite team on the base into an unwinnable situation based on intelligence he himself had falsified. When the SEALs were wiped out, the blame would fall on the inadequate air support. Specifically, it would fall on the female A-10 pilot he so despised. Captain Rostova's failure would be the centerpiece of his argument that women were not suited for combat. The tragedy would prove his point, discredit his rivals, and, in his twisted mind, clear a path for his own advancement. He had underestimated two things: the sheer tenacity of Reaper Team and the skill and courage of Captain Eva Rostova. He never imagined she would defy orders. He never imagined she could single-handedly turn the tide of a battle she was meant to lose. The final piece of evidence was the recording from Eva's cockpit. It captured everything: her calm requests for updates, the panicked calls from the ground, her commander's order to stand down, and her clear, unwavering decision to engage. It was a perfect record of her insubordination, but in the context of the conspiracy, it was a record of her heroism. A week after the ambush, Colonel Jennings was summoned to the base commander's office. He walked in with his usual arrogant swagger, completely unaware of the net that had closed around him. Waiting for him were the base commander, the lead investigator, and standing silently in the corner, Captain Eva Rostova and Commander Mason Thorne. Jennings's face paled when he saw them. The investigator laid it all out, playing the recordings, showing the messages, detailing the entire treacherous plot. The colonel's blustering denials crumbled into pathetic silence. He was stripped of his rank and taken into custody, his career ending not with a star, but with shackles. 2 weeks later, a formal ceremony was held on the main tarmac of the base. The entire wing was assembled, along with Reaper Team standing tall and proud. Eva stood before the commanding general, the very man Jennings had sought to undermine. "Captain Eva Rostova," the general began, his voice booming across the tarmac. "You were placed in an impossible situation. You faced a choice between following orders and saving the lives of your comrades. A pilot's duty is to the soldiers on the ground. You chose to uphold that duty at great personal and professional risk." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the crowd. "Your actions on that night were not an act of insubordination. They were an act of profound courage and loyalty. You did not fail. You adapted, you fought, and you won." He then pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the nation's highest awards for heroism in aerial combat, onto her uniform. As the entire base erupted in applause, Eva's eyes met Mason Thorne's. He gave her a wide, genuine smile, a look of pure, unadulterated respect. The journey from being the mocked and underestimated woman in the briefing tent to the decorated hero on the tarmac was complete. But the story didn't end there. The twist wasn't just that a traitor was exposed. It was what happened next. The story of the Valkyrie of Zarin Valley became a quiet legend in the special operations community. A-10 pilots were always respected, but Ava became something more. She became the standard. Months later, on another base, preparing for another mission, a new team of Special Forces operators were in a briefing. Their air support pilot walked in. She was young, focused, and a woman. A few of the operators exchanged skeptical glances. Before their team leader could say a word, a seasoned master chief, a man who had been in the service for 30 years, spoke up from the back of the room. "All right, listen up," he said, his voice silencing the murmurs. "Before any of you tough guys get any stupid ideas, let me tell you a story about a SEAL team that was dug in for a last stand. They were dead to rights until a pilot they'd laughed at earlier that day decided to disobey orders and fly her Warthog straight through the gates of hell to save them." He looked each of them in the eye. "We don't judge pilots by what they look like. We judge them by what they do when we're on the ground with our lives in their hands. You show our eye in the sky the respect she's earned. Are we clear?" A chorus of "Yes, Master Chief" filled the tent. The young pilot stood a little taller. The truth of what Ava had done hadn't just earned her a medal. It had changed minds. It had shattered prejudices. Her courage had lit up more than just a dark valley in the desert. It had illuminated a path for others to follow, ensuring that those who came after her would be judged not by their gender, but by their strength, their skill, and the fire in their hearts.